And so, yes, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see the names on the screen. And Joanne, is that you? You always turn on your screen. I appreciate it. It makes me feel, and who else is there? I don't see, oh, Ellen. Ellen, good morning. Yes, hope you're feeling okay. What will be uploaded, and it has not yet been uploaded, it is being uploaded, is a packet that I'm giving out to those who are here, which is a packet. The first page is who wrote the books of the Tanakh, and really will give you an overview of the 24 books and who wrote each of them, which I think is something we're always interested in. Again, it's the traditional approach. The next page is history of rabbinic literature, which is where I'm going to land in a moment. I'm going to orally say it, a little oral Torah, if you don't yet have it on the you call it the hub, wherever they put things. The second page, which says page 9 on the bottom, forget the page numbers. These are not mine. I have to be honest, I don't even know who put them together. They did a phenomenal job. The history of rabbinic literature has on that page the men of the Great Assembly, Shimon HaTzadik. We talked about them last week. That idea that really is the beginning of the rabbinic period. Right after Ezra, they begin pulling together the Torah, actually Tanakh, the canonization of Tanakh, and creating the liturgy and all the things that really set into motion a more uniform and applied application of the written words of Torah. We then have the period of the Zugot, which I taught a lot about in the first year of this curriculum. Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer, which is the street right behind us. Yossi ben Yochanan, Yoshua ben Prachya, right? Those are names that should be familiar, ending with Hillel and Shammai. Then begins the Tanaim, 40 to 220, really, CE. And there we have Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Meir, right? Really the luminaries of the Tanaitic period who bring us the core material of the Mishnah. And then starting 200, we have the Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael and the Amoraim in Bavel. And Rabbi Chia is really, he comes from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael to learn with Rebbe. He is attributed with the redaction, the pulling together of Tosefta, all these extra Tanaitic texts that weren't put in the Mishnah. And so it's interesting that that whoever edited this didn't put Rabbi Chia on here at all, right? That's interesting. But Rabbi Chia really, if we were penciling him in, should really be right under Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, because he would have lived during the Tanaitic period into the Amoraitic period. He is the uncle of Rav. Rav is very much on this list. Rav, who comes to Eretz Yisrael and goes back to Bavel to found an enormous yeshiva. We're going to learn about Rav. And then following that are what's called the Savoraim. Really, in Bavel, they continue the editing of the Talmud for 100, 200 years, and then the Gaonim. So we're going to be resting this year or working through this year the period of the Amoraim, starting with Rabbi Chia, who really is a bridge. On the next page, right? So I'm giving you a heads up for what's on in this packet, the books of Torah Sheba'al Peh. This really is a wonderful visual for what we talked about last week. The Mishnah on one side, right? The last page is all 63 tractates broken down by order of the Mishnayot. But we have the Mishnah, and to the right, the idea of Braita, which are rabbinic statements from the Mishnah, not in the Mishnah, made up of two primary sources, Tosefta and Halachic Midrash. Those were the two, right? We talked about that last week as well. If you weren't here, you can listen to the recording. And the Tosefta is attributed to Rabbi Chia. That's why this is so important. And the Halachic Midrashim are really rabbinic statements following the text of Torah, pasuk by pasuk. And there are the examples, Mechilta, Sifra, Sifrei. They get brought into the Talmud as Braitot. So when you see Braita, oh, this is a Braita, they're talking about two pools of text, of a grouping of text, Tosefta and Halachic Midrash. That's really it. Those are the Braitas. But it's an enormous amount, right? It's not a small amount. And then when we look at the period of the Gemara, we have Midrash Agadah, all the Midrashim that are so familiar to us. On the back page is a listing of what they are. all of the rabbas, the tanchumas, the psiktas, those are all Midrash Agadah. Most of them are coming out of Eretz Yisrael at some point, because really they go until about 1200 CE. They move to Bavel, but the majority of Midrash Agadah is coming together in Eretz Yisrael at the time of the Amoraim. So a lot of the rabbis' names are Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael. And to the right of that is the Talmud, which is a combination of Mishnah and Gemara. It begins as a commentary of the Mishnah, but it goes much, much, much further, right? It goes much further. It brings in rabbinic history and medicine and psychology and science and folklore. All of those things get bundled into the Talmud, but the starting point is always the Mishnah. And you can have a Mishnah that has pages of Talmud. It goes on for pages and pages. The first Sugyan Gitin, I think, goes on for 14 pages or something like that. And you can have a little paragraph, like a Mishnah, and then a little paragraph, and then a Mishnah, right? It just depends on how the editors saw the importance of expanding that Mishnah outward, or whether there were other Mishnayot that needed more space, so to speak. So that's a little bit of history. And as I said, the last page are the 63 tractates, and the last paragraph on what's called page 8, but it's not page 8. It's the last page of this pack. Actually, it is page 8 because there are 4 pages. That's the only accurate number. Is that, it tells you where there's Bavli and where there's Yerushalmi. Not all tractates of Mishnah have Bavli. Not all tractates of Mishnah have Yerushalmi. And what whoever put this together did is they said, okay, in Zraim, there's Yerushalmi. Bavli is only on Brachot. In Moed, right, there's Yerushalmi on everything, Bavli on everything except Shkalim. Nashim, Yerushalmi and Bavli on everything. Nizikin, Bavli and Yerushalmi on almost everything. Kodshim, Bavli and everything, but no Yerushalmi. And Taharot, only Yerushalmi, with the Bavli only on Nida, right? So you see a little bit of how the editing process went, and which Talmuds kind of dominated certain orders. And that we're not really doing a class in Talmud this year, but this is a good overview as we begin to delve into some of the personalities of this period of time. Okay, anyone have a question, a clarifying question? Hopefully that will be uploaded and you will have that for yourselves. And welcome to, thank you for coming in person. We have a lovely classroom this morning, and you're all welcome to come in when you can. But let us pick up with Rabbi Chia. So really the only source I got to last week, everyone okay? Everyone have their source sheet? Because I have extras.
Last week?
Yeah,
I never got it.
you never got. So there you
Thank
go.
you.
Thank you for staying safe. The only source we really got to was Maimonides. And I started with the Rambam's intro to Mishnah, because really it goes on for, I think, 40 seifim, 40 little subsections within the chapter, where he talks about the redaction and the primacy of Mishnah. But Rabbi Chia gets a shout out in number 2, that Rabbi Chia composed a book to follow after his teachers in it, to become what had been garbled and explain what had been garbled in the words of his teacher, and that is the Tosefta. Its purpose is to elucidate the Mishnah. Now, I don't think that's completely accurate. The purpose was to include material not included in the Mishnah, some of which does elucidate the Mishnah, but often it presents varying opinions beyond what is in the Mishnah. So it doesn't really elucidate the Mishnah. It expands and shows us that in the Tanaitic period there was much more diversity than the Mishnah presents. And it is and so on. And then he goes on to say, Rav, number 3, composes the Braita, the Sifra, and the Sifrei. Really, again, not fully accurate. The Sifra and the Sifrei came out of the schools of Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, but it sounds like he redacts them, right? He starts organizing and collating the material. And then, because it's the Rambam and it's the intro to the Mishnah, number 4, these texts were not smooth like the words of the Mishnah, and their word matters were not as organized or terse. True. That part is 100% true. The Mishnah is very well organized. The Mishnah is kind of tries to get rid of extraneous material, sometimes to the point that we don't always understand what the Mishnah is talking about. And so then we need to read the commentary on the Mishnah, but it is much more succinct. The Tosefta is 4 times as long as the Mishnah, so that tells you something. And the idea is that Rebbe was trying to think of how to present 63 tractates of material in a way that people could hold on to, could follow without getting lost in the sea of words. And he says in number 5, everyone that came after the Mishnah only came to devote his attention to the Mishnah. Mishnah remains the central body of text around which the Talmud will organize itself, both the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. But the Tosefta becomes one of the primary parallel texts in the Talmud. In other words, we would not really have a rich discourse in the Talmud without the Tosefta, without the Midrashei Halacha. If we only had the Mishnah, it would be limited how far afield we could go. By bringing in diverse, varying opinions in other Tannaitic texts, the Talmud is able to do what the Talmud does. So I want to give Rabbi Chia full credit. Okay, let us now begin looking more deeply into Rabbi Chia and his legacy. First source we're going to see, it's very short. Amar le Rabbi Zera. We're in Chulin. We are going to learn about Rabbi Zera. He's a very, very important figure in the Talmudic era. He too goes back, and he really goes back and forth between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael. So he will hold both traditions. And what he says here, Lava minu lachu, kol matnita delotanya be Rabbi Chia ube Rabbi Oshaya mishabashtahi. If you don't have Tannaitic traditions that were taught in the schools of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshaya, they are corrupt. V'lo totvu mine be midrasha, and they should not be used to challenge anything in our Beit Midrash. And basically what he's saying is there's an integrity to the traditions brought by Rabbi Chia. You can trust that they're really Tannaitic. Now, you have to remember that one of the concerns by Rabbi Zera is third century, like 300 CE, is are people going to bring false text, right? Tannaitic text that's not Tannaitic. How do we trust the integrity of a Braita? Rebbe, we know what to do with. He redacted all this Mishnah. No one's going to pretend it's a fake Mishnah. But the Braitas, coming in, please. The Braitas, there's so many of them. How are we going to know what is authentic and what is not? And what he says is, if they're not attributed, this we already did, but I'll give it to you, to the schools of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshaya, they should not be credible. Okay, so Rabbi Chia's name, his hechsher, right? It's like Machbud, right? Rav Machbud. It's like a Rav Machbud hechsher. No one's going to really disagree with the integrity of that hechsher. Rav Reuben, Rav Machbud, right? We all know those hechshers. Okay, let's take a look at the next, right? That's in Chulin. It's Rabbi Zera, who's an Amora, who's looking and saying, if I see the hechsher of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshaya, we'll do Rabbi Oshaya separately, then I know these are credible Braitas. Reish Lakish is going to say something similar. Reish Lakish is in Eretz Yisrael. He is a colleague of Rabbi Yochanan. I get into them and their relationship as well. And he says, Da'amar Reish Lakish, Hareini kaparat Rabbi Chia ubanav, shebetchila kshenishtacha Torah mi-Yisrael, Allah Ezra mi-Bavel v'yista. So he says as follows. I don't know what exactly he means as an atonement. Maybe the idea is he comes along and he can continue their legacy, which would be in danger of being forgotten if not for people continuing the legacy. Rabbi Chia and his sons at some point when Rabbi Chia is alive have a close relationship. They learn Torah together. And when Rabbi Chia dies, his sons go off the derech. We're going to get to them in brachot, right? I want to just, Rabbi Chia and his sons, right? They're going to appear in a lot of sources a number of sources. They themselves become great in stature, but after he dies, they're not able to hold on to that degree of commitment, as we're going to say. Okay, so what does that mean? Allah Ezra mi Bavel v'yista. When Ezra came up from Bavel, he reestablished the Torah. Chazra v'nishtakha, then it got forgotten, right? It's very hard to remember Hillel, Allah Hillel habavli v'yista. Hillel also comes up from Bavel. The idea that that's not enough luminaries come up from Bavel, but the ones that do have incredible significance. Alu Rabbi Chia uvanav yisdua. They do the pattern. Ezra, Hillel, Rabbi Chia. V'kein amar Rabbi Chia uvanav lo nechleku Rabbi Dosa v'chachamim al machzalot shel Usha. So I taught this actually, this sugya, when we looked at Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa in the first year. I'm not going to go into the technicality of the argument. But Rabbi Chia and his sons come up from Bavel, and they teach the machloket between Rabbi Dosa, who's in Eretz Yisrael, right? They're holding on even in Bavel to the authenticity of arguments that took place like 200 years earlier. And they say they disagreed about various things, but they didn't disagree of these soft mats of Usha, that they could become impure, right? Because these mats are made to lie on. And so if you would lean on them, lie on them, tread on them, and you were impure, they would become impure. It's an argument in Tuma and Tara. I didn't want to go into that. I thought about it, and then I'm like, you know what, this is not so relevant. I taught it a few years ago, just a little bit of the argument. But what's important here is you have Rabbi Chia and his sons coming up from Bavel and clarifying to the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael where Rabbi Dosa ben Chanina and the rabbis argued and didn't argue, right? They're repositories of an integrity of transmitting tradition. And that's one of the biggest concerns at this time, right? Largely because the Tanaitic period is nicely contained in Eretz Yisrael. So information can easily travel in with integrity, with authenticity, with clarity between Yavne and the Galil, right? It's not that far. But now suddenly Bavel is beginning to be a more dominant space for Torah study. And are we going to be able to hold on to all of this information? And so to have a sage from Bavel who holds clearly, tightly, what was coming out of Eretz Yisrael a few hundred generations earlier, it tells us a lot about Rabbi Chia and his ability to liyasedet HaTorah. So he's a bridge between the two countries, between the two schools of Torah, and he's going to have this incredible integrity, and he's going to situate himself in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so that just gives us, we're interested in the history of transmission. Okay, we're now getting into Baba Metzia. There happens to be one story here I've taught, some of you have heard it, that I absolutely love, which tells us a lot about Rabbi Chia and where he thinks Torah needs to go to be saved, to be taught, to be transmitted. Elitism versus, what do we call the opposite of elitism? Populism. Okay, populism, although that's not a good word today, but it's the right thing. Right, it was that. Okay. Reish Lakish was I just brought this in the English translation. Thank you to Sfaria. Largely because it was very much in Aramaic. So when it's in Hebrew, I try to bring more of the original text and we can read it, or if it's short. This is a very long piece. Reish Lakish was going around. He was demarcating burial caves of the sages. I'm about to give a podcast for Pardes, actually. I help with I often do the Parsha podcast. And we have Avram Avinu, who's going to buy in Chaye Sarah. The Parsha I'm going to be doing is Chaye Sarah. And he buys the burial cave. Why does Reish Lakish want to demarcate or find out where the sages are buried who have died before him? And I heard you went to a lecture about Nova. I think right now we are in a period of time where demarcating burial sites is incredibly important. I won't, I want to turn this into a class on Shchol, but we know we want to get the bodies back to bury them. And we know that we want people to have proper burial and know where they're buried. It's not just for those who have passed away, it's for us. And he wants to demarcate these caves because it's important. It's important to know where these people are buried. When he arrived at the cave of Rabbi Chia, he wasn't able to demarcate, to find out what the boundaries of the burial cave were. It's been it actually hasn't even been that long. Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are like first, second generation Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Chia might even, I don't know if they ever have a direct, they don't seem to have direct. It seems like he's died and they then come on to the scene. But he doesn't know, and it distresses him.
Did they lose the information because the sons went off the derech, and there was no
We
matzeh?
can, at the end of this, we'll figure this out. It doesn't look like there are matzevas the way he's trying to put matzevas in. Seems like many things with the world, you just knew. You just knew. He said, Master of the universe, did I not analyze Torah like Rabbi Chia? Why am I not being like, what is it about Rabbi Chia that I'm not able to figure this out? Like, I've gone to the other sages and there have been the signs that I need. And because I'm a Torah scholar and I know how graves are, how we do our graves, and I've learned Negaim and not Negaim, Tarot, like I know how we bury. Why am I not able to use my Torah knowledge? Like, what about my Torah isn't? A divine voice emerged and said, you did analyze Torah like him, but you did not disseminate Torah like him. And now we get a story. This is a very beautiful story. I often, when I teach Jewish educators outside of the world of observance, largely, I teach those who I was in Melbourne, non-Orthodox Jewish educators. I'll use this with Orthodox Jewish educators as well. But I try to get them excited about philosophy of education. Where do you put your resources? And I have a number of stories I bring from the Talmud. One is about Rav, which we'll get to when we get to Rav, and one is about Rabbi Chia. And Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Chia are debating. And Rabbi Chanina says, do you think you could debate with me? Heaven forbid, if the Torah were forgotten from the Jewish people, I could restore it with my powers of analysis and intellectual acumen. So Rabbi Chanina basically says, the way in which Torah will be restored is through intellectual genius, through people who can using their powers of intellect, reestablish, no one's worried the words of Torah are going to get forgotten, but the words of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral transmission. So it's okay. Any giant who has learned some Torah can figure out the different principles of hermeneutics and the methodologies and restore Torah. This is a very elitist perception of how Torah needs to be studied in order to be passed on. Bring the intellectual giants into a room and give them Torah. Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I don't completely disagree, meaning I'm not an elitist, but I do want my doctors to be really good at medicine and my lawyers who represent me to be really good at legal, knowing legal knowledge. And the idea that a doctor, if he knows the principles of how different body systems work, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, if he ends up on an island somewhere without any of his textbooks, can use that basic knowledge to figure out, I want that doctor treating me. So, from a certain perspective, certainly at this period of time, the idea that we need the giants of intellect to dedicate themselves to learning Torah, to save the transmission, the Masoret, he's saying something here. And he's saying, you, Rabbi Chia, learn Torah differently than I do, and I'm an intellectual giant, and you can't really debate with me because I intellectually am more of a giant than you.
Why are they so worried about losing?
Because we're in that period of flux post-Second Temple. We're going into exile. We already have disseminated Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. We know there are Jews in Rome at this point, certainly in other, right? We know the 10 tribes have gotten lost. By the way, the 10 tribes get lost, and when we bring back Ethiopia and India and Uganda, they don't have Torah Sheba'al Peh. They don't have Torah Sheba'al Peh the way it gets developed at this period of time. So, that brings up meta questions about what is closer to the Sinai tradition. I mean, we could do a lot with that. I don't want to right now, but that's what they're afraid of, that this enormous legacy of Rebbe, what's been going on from Ezra and Anshe Knesset Agdola, Shmona Esrei, right? Like Birkat Hamazon, the way they put it together. That could get lost if we don't have enough people who are holding it and who are able to reconstruct it. If all the Batei Midrash go up in flame, it has to be, right? So, and he says, it's not just that I remember, I have the tools of analysis. That's what he says. That's all I need. But now what does Rabbi Chia say? We're going to see, this is the debate. This is the educational debate. It's a really important one. And Rabbi Chia then says, do you think you can debate with me? You can't. I'm acting to ensure the Torah will not be forgotten by the Jewish people. How? What do? I go and sow flax. We're going to see that, by the way, he's a flax merchant, or he sows and sells flax. That's what he does. That's why flax is not incidental here. It appears in two other sources. We're going to see that is his parnasa. I go and sow flax, and I twine nets, and I hunt deer, which are kosher, and I feed their meat to the orphans. So first of all, I love this. It's food security for those who are insecure. It's very nice that you have all your gemachs and your kupa, and those are important. But I actually go and I do something. And I prepare parchment. Because why do I catch the deer? Because I need to write scrolls. And I don't throw away the meat. I give the meat to orphans. I don't sell it in the market and make money. I give it to the orphans to feed them. And what do? I prepare parchment, and I write the 5 books of the Torah. At that point, the Torah would have 1 parchment for each book of the Torah. And I go to a city and teach 5 children the 5 books. And I teach 6 children the 6 orders of the Mishnah. So he has 2 different methods. 1 written, right? He writes the Torah, which he knows, and 1 oral, because the Mishnah at this point would have at least, by tradition, been taught orally. And he gives each child responsibility for 1 order or 1 book of Torah. And I say to them, until I return, come read each other and teach each other. He says, each of you now have ownership over 1, and you're responsible for teaching that. And then you're going to listen to everything else. And then you're going to go out and keep teaching Vayikra. You're going to teach Devarim. You're going to teach Bamidbar. You're going to teach Zerayin. I am taking these children who are not brilliant luminaries, who won't necessarily hold everything, but I'm going to make them really good at one thing, and then they can go out and pass on that information. And that way the Amcha can be hearing it from Amcha. Right? It's populist, right? I'm going to bring our texts and our oral to the children, first of all, and I'm going to let the children go out and teach Am Yisrael. And it's very, very deliberate, and it's very, very intentional. And if those children all forget what they've been taught, right. Like hopefully they've passed it on and it'll keep going, but it's not the elitist deduction and analysis of the, the hermeneutics of the text. It's down here. It's on the ground. It's anchored, right? It's on the ground. And he says, that's what I do. And I go from city to city. And this is what I do. The Gemara then says, Rebbe says, now that's going to be interesting because Rebbe and Rabbi Chia are going to fight about this. Rabbi Chia is going to go out to the marketplace to teach Torah, and Rebbe says Torah should stay in the Beit Midrash, right? So it's interesting that Rebbe, and again, I just want to point this out when we get to that story, how great are the deeds of Rabbi Chia, right? How great are they that he does this? I don't do this, right? That's amazing that he's willing to teach children. You don't get as much glory or grandeur or even intellectual stimulation by going out and teaching children. But by giving them ownership over part of the Torah, they can go out and teach, and then the Torah gets disseminated. It's a beautiful concept. And so if I go back to Reish Lakish, the divine voice says to him, you were like Rabbi Chanina, like you were amazing. Of course, your powers of analysis are beyond parallel, right? Like incredible analysis. But you didn't disseminate it, right? You kept it in the walls of the academy. That's very important. Yes, we need that also. But if I look at Am Yisrael, it's a Moshe Rabbeinu moment. I think that's what Moshe was doing, right? Teaching Torah to Amcha.
The thing that's bothering me is why can't it be God to God? I would think that this is why
it's a story, and it is God for God, right? Of course, we need both. Absolutely. We need both. But from the story is talking about a particular moment, and the idea that is there a preferencing? And they know that the rabbis of the academy preference the academy. But Rabbi Chia steps outside and says, no, I want to get to the children. Yeah.
It was very interesting that you mentioned medicine, because there's this huge movement now, at least in North America, to try to push doctors who are social justice warriors even ahead of their academic achievements and their knowledge. And it's like a big war going on.
Yeah, there's a big war going on. I'll also say that part of what's happened in the States because doctors are so expensive and medicine is so expensive is, the nurse practitioner and the PA, the physician's assistant, who are not being trained as full, right? They can't perform surgery, but they're being basically the understanding is at a certain level, medicine is not that you need a base knowledge like nursing, like a few degrees up. And when you get up to more, difficult diagnoses and surgery, then we'll leave that to the doctor. So what's happening there is also interesting that everything used to be the doctor, but now it's understood, wait, we can also delegate some of that. We can give some of that to other medical professionals, which will make people have more access and easier access.
But they
Okay.
lose access to the doctors.
But that's been happening, anyway. Okay, let's keep going. So Rabbi Yossi says, right? Rabbi Yossi says what he says, how great are the deeds of Rabbi Chia. Now, I also taught Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi, is adopted by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And it seems like his father dies when he's quite young, and he grows up in Rebbe's house. Are his deeds even greater than the master's? Like, are you saying Rabbi Chia is even greater than you? And Rebbe says yes. Rebbe is going to show a lot of humility in stories, and he says yes. And now I feel the catch in his voice as he says, "Are they greater than my father's?" Right? Like, okay, you're here, you're flesh and blood, and if you say yes, I can appreciate your humility. But my father, in my mind, is the great, like, I need him to be the greatest of all rabbis, right? Like, there's something very sweet and poignant and little boyish about this man turning to Rebbe and saying, wait, greater than daddy, right? Isn't my daddy the best? And what does he say to him? He says, heaven forbid, such shall not be heard among the Jewish people. Whether it's true or not, stay with your father as the best, as the biggest, as the brightest, as the best. It's okay. It's okay. No, your father is your father. So I pick up on that. I don't think many people do. Often these stories you just read and keep going. If you know a little bit about Rabbi Yishmael and his relationship, Rabbi really takes him on and cares for him. But I feel the missing, the yearning. But my father, okay. So I'm just pointing that out. I think it's a nugget in this, like in these texts. Rabbi Zera said last night, remember I said Rabbi Zera, who says anyone who doesn't quote a Braita from Rabbi Pia and Rabbi Oshaya, those are not authentic. So here's Rabbi Zera. We're moving around. Nothing is correct. We had Reish Lakish, who's a first generation Amora in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Zera, who's I think second, who comes up from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, back and forth. Last night, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Chanina, appeared to me. I said to him, near whom are you in the upper realms? I want to know what it looks like up there. We know about burial caves here, but where are you situated? He said near Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are pairs, if you remember. And Rabbi Yochanan is near whom? Near Rabbi Yanai. And Rabbi Yanai is near whom? Near Rabbi Chanina. And Rabbi Chanina is near whom? Rabbi Chia, which is interesting because we just heard about their debate. So they get to continue debating in the world to come as well. I said to Rabbi Yossi, but isn't Rabbi Yochanan worthy of being near Rabbi Chia? He said, in a place of fiery sparks and burning fires, who can bring Rabbi Yochanan, son of Napcha? He was the son of a blacksmith, and blacksmiths also cause sparks to fly when they do their shotting of the animals. So who could bring him there? That would be a terrible idea. You'd have fire and fire. That would be too combustive, even in the upper realm. So again, it's cute, right? These conversations are so sweet. Who's next to whom? Rabbi Chaviva said, Rabbi Chaviva bar Sormakel told me, someone you never hear of, very obscure sage. I saw one of the sages whom Elijah would visit. His eyes looked beautiful in the morning, but appeared charred by fire in the evening. I said to him, what is this? And he said to me, I said to Elijah, show me the sages upon their ascension to the heavenly academy. Elijah said, you may gaze at all of them except for those in the chariot, the Megorcha of Rabbi Chia, upon whom you may not gaze. So I want to, right, this is also, it's such a fantasy. It's also a little bit mythological. Who goes in a chariot from one end of the heaven to the other every day in mythology? It's Apollo, just for my, right? Go back to sixth grade mythology, right? Apollo drives his chariot across the sky. So who do we have? We have the sages kind of driving these chariots across the sky. And he says, I saw this sage in the morning. His eyes were beautiful, but in the evening already seemed to be charred. What happened? And apparently, the only chariot you weren't supposed to look at was the chariot of Rabbi Chia. There are also these overtures with Greek, the Greeks, where you're told don't do this, and they do this, and there's consequence. I asked, well, what are the signs of Rabbi Chia? How do I know which one's Chia? He says, angels accompany all of the other chariots as they ascend and descend, except for the chariot of Rabbi Chia, which ascends and descends of its own. So if you see that happening, sometimes I wonder if J.K. Rowling knew all these stories, right? Like in terms of, I'm very serious, right? Like these stories are incredible. So the chariot, his chariot goes of its own accord. No one is pushing or pulling it. The other sages all have the chariots being accompanied. Okay, I was unable to restrain myself. So the sage telling the story says, now I have to look. Now I have to look. Who does it remind us of in the biblical story? Lot's wife, who also turns around. Now I can't look away. Luckily, that's not the ending here. And I gazed upon his chariot. 2 fiery flames came and struck me in my eyes. I was blinded. The next day, I prostrated on Rabbi Chia's burial cave. I guess they finally did figure out the demarcation, and said, I study the brighthood of the master. I study your Torah. Please pray for me. And my vision was healed, but my eyes remained scorched. I carried a scar of that, of not following Elijah. By the way, you don't want to disobey Elijah, Eliyahu Navi. He's also pretty fiery. There's a lot of fire around all of these characters. And I was healed. Okay, we have another story with Eliyahu. We're going to finish this and then we can talk a little. Eliyahu was often found in the academy of Rebbe. He would go and hear Torah in Rebbe's academy. One day was Rosh Chodesh, and Eliyahu was late and didn't come. Rabbi Yehuda says to Eliyahu, why were you delayed? He said, I had to wake up Avraham, wash his hands, wait for him to pray, and then lay him down again. Yeah, I love this because the idea that we have a need to think in the world to come, our loved ones are living a life of whatever they're living, continuing to do. And by the way, and you see this often, but I saw this in Nova all the time. May she be dancing up in heaven. May they be playing their music. May they be making art, right? This idea that we want to think of our loved ones still doing what was so evocative of who they were in the world to come. And that's what we have here. We have Eliyahu has to wake Avram up because someone, there's no night or day, so to speak. And so it's morning, it's time for Shacharit, wash his hands and then lay him down. And similarly, and I did the same for Yitzchak and I did the same for Yaakov. And he says, well, why don't you save yourself a little time and then you won't be late. Remember, it's Rosh Chodesh, it's a longer davening. He says, why don't you just wake them all up at the same time? Then they can daven Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, like they can all daven together. He says, well, if I were to wake all of them up, they would generate powerful prayers and bring Mashiach. I can't take that, meaning that's not for me to do, right? Even up in heaven. And Rebbe says, is there anyone in this world who is comparable to them? And he says, Rabbi Chia and his sons. Rebbe decreed a fast. They're alive, by the way, because Rabbi Chia is alive. And they bring Rabbi Chia and his sons down to the pulpit. And Rabbi Chia says, Mashiv haruach, and the wind blew. And he says, Morida Geshem, and the rain fell. Now, try to remember this, put it in the back of your mind. We're going to have a story with Rav and an anonymous teacher of small children. There's a direct connection between those two stories. When we get to Rav, I'll point it out. But remember, Rabbi Chia teaches small children. Rav comes to a town and they ask Rav to pray because there's a drought. Rav is a Molidist. Rav prays and rain doesn't come. This no-name elementary school teacher gets up and says, Mashiv haruach, and the wind blows, Morida Geshem, and the rain falls. Okay, but this is taking place before. It's Rabbi Chia, and he's about to say Tchiyat HaMeitim, Machayei Meitim. And Rebbe gets very nervous, and not just Rebbe. They said, who is the revealer? The world trembles. Who is the revealer of secrets in the world? Wait a minute. You're bringing him to daven Tchiyat HaMeitim? We're not ready for that. The world's not ready. We cannot have the dead being resurrected. Now, there's something also wistful. Like there are these moments that we could bring it and we're being held back, right? Who's holding us back? God. But there are these people like Rabbi Chia who could bring the resurrection, and yet we don't let him do it, right? He's not allowed to do it, just like we don't allow Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to join together to pray. Okay, that brings up other questions. By the way, the Mashiach doesn't come. So they're dealing with that reality. But it's this idea that there are people who could bring him, but we're not ready as a communally. Now, it's Eliyahu. Okay, those who learned with me the Elisha ben Abuya story. Okay, Elisha ben Abuya inadvertently gets Metatron in trouble. If anyone remembers that story, Marcia, you remember the story, right? Joanne, you were with me. So Elisha ben Abuya goes up and sees Metatron writing in a book and thinks that's another god. Like, is there more than one god? It causes him, because Metatron looks like God writing in his books. And as a result, Metatron gets 60 lashes of fire. And Elisha, out of revenge, right, Metatron is allowed to punish Elisha, who's now denied tshuva. It's a brilliant story. It's a very complicated story, but I just want to show you how stories borrow from each other. Eliyahu has now told Rebbe, oh, get Rabbi Chia to daven, and you're going to see what happens. Rabbi Chia and his sons are with him, but Rabbi Chia is davening. Like Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, he has 2 sons, so it's 3. He was beaten with 60 fiery lashes, right? Eliyahu gets beaten. Same thing that happens to Metatron. Don't be revealing the secrets of the upper realm to the people down below. That's a really, really bad idea, right? I would also say there are some mythological overtones here. Elisha comes down disguised as a bear of fire. He comes down and distracts them and doesn't let Rabbi Chia recite the phrase. And then things go back to normal. Okay, he's a bear of fire. They're fascinating. These stories are just fascinating. And often, as I said, they get read very quickly and passed over because, oh, it's a God, we're not going to read, we don't want to read. But there's so much going on here. So let's just recap. Rabbi Chia, the reason I brought this is it's very Rabbi Chia centered. It starts with Reish Lakish. He cannot demarcate burial cave of Rabbi Chia. That information might need to be controlled or contained, maybe because he's not great enough. Do we want people going to Rabbi Chia's grave? Later in the story, someone finds Rabbi Chia's grave and is healed. Okay, so that connects the beginning and the end of the story. We now have Rabbi Chia's populist attitude towards teaching Torah, which is everyone should learn Torah, children should learn Torah, give them ownership over a small part, and they'll go out and teach it. You're right. Amcha cannot learn all of the Torah and hold on to it and remember it, but if you break it down and give them a little piece of Torah, there's a beautiful Hasidic idea. Every person has one letter of the Torah that is theirs, right? We all know in education that that idea of frontal teaching and just pushing information does not work for a lot of children. Breaking it down and having them take a kind of responsibility for some of it is much more effective. And that's what he's doing 2,000 years ago. We then get into the story, that very sweet moment with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yassi. That fear of, wait, isn't really, he's greater than my father. And Rabbi Yehuda takes the moment to say, no, not your father. But we kind of understand he is greater than Rabbi, like he's great, he's really, really great. We then have the stories of who's buried next to whom in the upper realm, and we go off on a tangent, what's going on in the upper realm. And we discover that it's important for certain people to be next to certain people, and to have 2 people who represent fire will cause too much combustion even in heaven. Again, that's interesting. And then we have the chariot of Rabbi Chia going back and forth, self-propelled, so to speak, because of his greatness, and that one cannot look at the fiery chariot, which reminds us Eliyahu goes up in a fiery chariot, right? Eliyahu is also very central here. And then we have the idea that Eliyahu comes to Rebbe's academy to hear his Torah. He's really a transmitter of Moshe's Torah in such an authentic way. One day he's late because he wakes up the Avot, and then we go into, is there anyone like that down on earth? Rabbi Chia and his sons, but the heavens basically prevent essentially the redemption. It's not time. We can't allow resurrection of the dead right now. And so Eliyahu has to come down as fire and prevent that from happening. Okay, so that really was a lovely just amalgamum, a collection of stories that show us who Rabbi Chia is. He's a man of the people, yet he's a man of the academy. He has a close relationship to his sons. They come with him, they learn with him, they disseminate Torah with him. There's a greatness to that connection between parent-child. That's why the end is going to be sad when they are no longer where they were when he was alive. What do you do when that figure in your life is no longer? How do you find comfort, and how do you find someone who can do that for you? Rabbi Yishmael goes to learn with Rabbi, right? Rabbi Yishmael, who has lost his father, finds a father figure and a mentor and a scholar in Rebbe. They don't seem to be able to find that. Okay. I'm going to pause. Anyone have a comment or question? I want to allow that since we just looked at a lot of material. Anything that resonated with you, that struck you, that you want to just reflect upon? Yes, please.
I think it's interesting because it appears then that the person who was the Baal Tefillah, there's no sitter. He's memorized all the Shemona Esrei.
Right.
So people aren't yelling from the back, "Machaya,"
Yeah.
like that they would say.
Right, maybe, right.
So it's a whole different look at what's going on. There's a leader of prayer, but it isn't necessarily.
No, I'm gonna say they do have the Shemona Esrei. That's been already put into order. There was a
But it's-
debate where they're to put these things. You're right. It's probably orally, right,
Yeah.
right. I wonder, that's an interesting idea. Could you, could it go out of order? Could they be saying now do Tchiyat HaMetim? Now that we see you did this, let's push towards Tchiyat HaMetim, right? Which does come soon after in the order.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. Like now let's get refuah, get everyone healed, get everything right. Like let's just get everything, done here. Yeah, interesting.
That's the fact.
Yes.
Question, did Rabbi Chia die young?
He does not die so young. No, he has grown children. We're going to get to his death. No, he dies after Rebbe. No, he lives. I don't know exactly if we're told how many years he lives. I don't remember, but no, he lives into his old age. He's going to be older when he dies. He lives a full life.
So is there any, I mean, this is probably horrible to say, is there something about his pedagogical approach that for some reason didn't resonate, or did it last with his own sons?
We're gonna get to we'll get to his sons. Wait to hear what I'm building. I've already given you that piece of information. We're not quite ready for it. I think we'll talk about it. What could happen? What could have happened to them after their father passed away? Anyone else? Someone online want to say something? Anyone have a comment or a thought? Okay, I just want you to feel you're part of the classroom discussion. Let's take a look at the next. We're gonna have two sources on flax. Remember, I said to you, he sows flax, but not just to make the nets, meaning he sells flax. Could moths have infested his flax? We're talking about Rabbi Chia's flax. We're in the middle of a conversation, as we often are. There's so much stuff before that's distracting that I just cut it to the central piece. But doesn't Ravin Bar Abba say, and some say Rabbi Avin Bar Sheva say, from when the people of the exile ascended, there ceased to be meteors, earthquakes, winds, thunder. Their wine did not sour, and their flax was not stricken with moths. And the sages placed their merit to the merit of Rabbi Chia and his sons who ascended from Babel. So, by the way, this would certainly be an Aliyah plug. Like if you come to Eretz Yisrael, all these terrible things stop when the people of the exile ascend. Now, it could be also we're conflating Ezra's time with Rabbi Chia. That's hundreds of years, so I don't know. But we're giving the sages say, at least in our time, Rabbi Chia gets credit. If so, how is Rabbi Chia's flax affected? Right? He has a moth infestation, not a good thing. When their merit is effective, it's effective for the rest of the world, but not for themselves. So that's interesting. They, pro bono is pro bono, right? Like you don't get benefit. And this is in accordance with Rav Yehuda, who says in the name of Rav. Rav Yehuda says that Rav said, each and every day a divine voice emerges and says, the entire world is sustained in the merit of Hanina ben Dosa, my son, and for Hanina, my son, a kav of carobs is sufficient to sustain him from one Shabbat Eve to the next. So the idea is it's a story, Hanina ben Dosa, who I've mentioned, very pious man, Second Temple, and he lives with very little, even though the world is sustained. So that again just shows that yes, Rabbi Chia and his sons, their merit affects others, but not themselves. They get, so we shouldn't think there's anything self-serving about them.
That's not the same Rabbi Hanina who was the elitist in the debate.
Same Rabbi Chia.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, it's Rabbi Chia. So
No,
he
Rabbi
did.
Hanina.
Oh, Rabbi Hanina it is the same Rabbi Hanina. No. Sorry, Hanina ben Dosa lives much earlier. The Rabbi Hanina here is in Amora. I think he appeared on the chart. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. No, he's a different Rabbi Hanina. A different Rabbi. Let's say, yeah, Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Oshaya appear more or less on the top of page 10. What says page 10? It's the top of the second page. And that's the Rabbi Hanina. He would have overlapped, right? They lived right before Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, so they would have lived at the same time as Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia should have been, in my opinion, on that line because he's Remember, Rabbi Zera says, Brightot attributed to Rabbi Yoshaya and Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Hanina is the one who argues. So we're talking about really first generation Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael, and Rabbi Chia is a last generation Tana. He's that bridge. I'm not going to go into again. I'm less interested in what's happening here in terms of the borrowing, the lending, rebate. I'm interested in the story of Rabbi Chia and the flax. Abba Bar Zamina gave a dinar to the food merchant and took from him at the cheapest rate of the entire year. Rav did not agree. Rabbi Chia the Great had flax. The donkey drivers wanted to buy it from him. He told them, it's not my intention to sell this before Purim. That's when apparently he can get the best price. They said to him, sell it to us now at the price which you would sell it for at Purim. Now, the problem is that that's a form of rebate because the price now is very low and you're saying you'll sell it at the price for Purim, but the donkey drivers want it now. So he went to ask Rebbe. Really, again, what I'm showing you here is the relationship, who said to him, it's forbidden. He went out, formulated this in a Braita, because Rebbe, and says as follows: if one was owing money and the other wanted to take it from him on the threshing floor with whatever's on the threshing floor, when he told him, credit it to my account by the market rate, and I shall provide you all 12 months, this is forbidden, for it's not as if the Assyrion came to his hand. In other words, this idea that I'm collecting a debt over a period of 12 months with what's on the threshing floor, when the price of what's on the threshing floor fluctuates up and down, is he says, I'm going to give you an example. Rebbe said my situation is forbidden, but that's not enough. I'm going to formulate a Braita. I'm going to turn it into something more expansive. Rav said, my uncle Rabbi Chia, and that's again why I brought this all because of the relationships, will agree that if they paid him and immediately acquired, then it's permitted, right? If they pay him immediately with whatever it is, and he then acquires what's on the threshing floor, that's fine. If he paid beforehand and acquired after, even if the price of what's on the threshing floor goes up, it's permitted. If he acquired it earlier and paid afterwards, it's forbidden. In other words, if he acquires what's on the threshing floor but only pays afterwards, then that is going to be a form of rebate. Again, I'm not going to go into the technicalities of rebate, but what we see here are three things I want to point out. He's a flax merchant. Number two, he goes to Rebbe to ask Shilas, right? They have that relationship. And he's the uncle of Rav. He's the uncle of Rav because Rav is the child of both his half sister and his half brother, but they don't. Step siblings from his step siblings. He was the youngest child of Rav Abba Bar Acha's second marriage, and Rav Chia's mother had a daughter from a previous marriage known as Ima. So apparently the child from Rav Abba's first marriage married the child from Rav Chia's mother's first marriage. Right, step siblings get married. They're each related to Rabbi Chia, right? Because at the time that, so let me just see if that works. Yes, because the daughter did not have Rabbi Chia's father as her father, and certainly the mother was not the same, and vice versa, right? They're step siblings, and they get married, and so they have a close relationship. Rav is named for Rabbi Abba. His name is Abba. That's his name, named for his father, for the grandfather, Rav Abba, for Rabbi Chia's father. Okay. So I just wanted to show that relationship, and we'll continue. It's a complicated family relationship. And okay, let's take a look at the next source. Rebbe was very meek and said, he was humble, really a better word, and said, all that a man might ask from me, I am ready to do, except for what the elders of Batera did for my ancestor. They divested themselves of their presidency and appointed him. Now, he's talking about Hillel. It's again a little bit of a bizarre story, and it seems like I'm ready to do everything except what they did, because they let go of their administrative position to appoint Hillel to that position. He doesn't argue that Hillel is a great scholar. He is. If Rav Huna, the head of the diaspora, would come here, I guess I would let him sit higher than myself, since he is from the tribe of Yehudan. I am from Benjamin. He is from the male line, and I am from the female. So he says something that seems to be contradictory. I don't fully understand it. I did look it up, and I thought I had taken a note, but I guess I didn't. Because I looked it up in a commentary, that he basically says, I wouldn't do that, but if Rav Huna comes, I would have to let him sit higher than me because he comes from a better lineage to the Davidic dynasty than I do. Once the elder Rabbi Chia the Great visited him and said, Rav Huna's outside. Okay, now meanwhile, Rabbi has gone along saying, well, if Rav Huna comes, I'll let him sit higher than me. But in a moment of truth, it's not so simple. And so what happens is the face of Rebbe became saffron colored. He turned, saffron is like an orangey color, but I think the idea is he turns red, like he blushes, like but from, like he doesn't really want to appoint Rav Huna. And Rav Chia said, oh, sorry, his coffin arrived. Okay, so this is a bit of a complicated story. In other words, on one hand, Rebbe is going on and saying, anything anyone asks for me, I'm ready to do. I wouldn't do that. Again, I don't know why that is, but I would let Rav Huna sit above me, right? Because he really is the heir to the dynastic throne of David HaMelech. And one day, Rabbi Chia, who knows he says this, comes in and says, hey, Huna's outside. And this embarrasses Rebbe because everyone knows he's been saying he'll let Huna sit above him. And now it's like moment of truth, and Huna's dead, right?
He didn't know.
He didn't know Huna was dead. And all Rav Chia the Great said is Huna's outside. So this leads to conflict. Rebbe said to him, go outside and look who wants you there. He basically says to him, go outside. He stepped outside and no one was there. He understood that Rebbe was angry with him, that he's being excommunicated, that he's embarrassed Rebbe. He did not visit again for 30 days, which is the minimum of excommunication. In those 30 days, Rav learned from Rabbi Chia the principles of Torah. So as an aside, he really focuses on his nephew and teaches him a lot. At the end of the 13 years and 30 days, so the 30 days turns into 13 years, Elijah, again, 13 is a powerful number. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but 13 midot and 30 days. Eliyahu visits Rebbe, here comes Eliyahu, in the likeness of the older Rabbi Chia. He said to him, how does my Lord feel? He said to him, one tooth hurts me. He said, show it to me. He showed it to him, put his finger in it, and it was healed. The next day, the older Rabbi Chia comes to him and says, how does Rabbi feel? What is with that tooth? He said to him, from the moment you put your finger on it, it was healed. At that moment, he said, woe on you, lying in women of Israel. Woe on you, pregnant women of the land of Israel. So basically, Rabbi Chia then says, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. So this idea that there are these powers that that Eliyahu brings for the honor of Rabbi Chia, and Rebbe suddenly says, oh, I've been denying all of us that kind of healing power that I've kicked out of the Beit Midrash. Okay. When Rebbe went to, from then on, Rebbe treated him with honor. When Rebbe went to the assembly hall, he said, may the older Rabbi Chia come inside. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yassi asked, here we go, remember Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yassi, closer than me? Wait, are you replacing me? He said, beware. No, of course not. The older Rabbi Chia went inside before Rabbi Yishmael. When inside, Rabbi Yishmael was innermost, and then Rabbi Chia. Rabbi used to say the praises of the older Rabbi Chia before Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yassi. There's jealous, right? Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yassi is used to being very close. He needs that closeness, and yet Rabbi Chia is really, really great, and he heals his, right? Like there are all these fantastic stories about him. Once Rabbi Yishmael saw him in the bathhouse, and he did not show him reverence. And he says to, he comes back to Rebbe and says, that's the one who you praise? He doesn't even say Shalom Aleichem to me. Like, what kind of person is this? He said, well, what did he do? He said, I saw him in the bathhouse and he did not show me reverence. Rebbe said to Rabbi Chia, why did you do that? He said, oh, so much should come over me if I realized I was washing myself that, like, I don't want to be distracted by the nakedness or the physical pleasure of the bathhouse. So my eyes were occupied with the allegorical interpretation of the entire book of Psalms.
What is it?
Like, all I was thinking about, I didn't see him because in my mind, I was visualizing Tehillim and how to allegorically interpret Tehillim. And so I didn't see him. Like, when I go to the bathhouse, I'm really sorry. If it had been in the market, I would have seen him. But in the bathhouse, I basically, like, I know caring for the body is very important, but I don't want to be distracted by that. And so I allegorize the book of Tehillim. And so Rebbe's like, whoa, like, who lives like that? And then what does he do? Rebbe appointed 2 students to accompany him to watch out for him. He's like, okay, anyone who's that not focused on what's going on in the real world needs to have students accompanying him, which is interesting because in the world to come, he doesn't need the angels to accompany him. I just realized this is Yerushalmi, that's Bavli. But what we see here, right, is the Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi, right? That fear of being replaced, that fear of being and looking for that moment to say, really, you think he's so great, right? Like he didn't even say hello to me. He didn't say shalom aleichem. And Rabbi's like, wait, that's not like him. Let me find out what's happening. And now he becomes even greater. Or Rabbi Yishmael bar Rabbi Yossi. I will say Rabbi Yishmael bar Rabbi Yossi in some of the stories is extremely obese. He and Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, 2 sons of very great scholars, become very, very obese. At least in the stories in Baba Metzia also. And that obviously has impact on them. So Rabbi Chia, it appears here as a source of tension in Rebbe's life, like either a lack of consideration and sensitivity for Rebbe trying to be humble and wanting to be humble, and yet in this moment of truth, not sure he can hold it. And then Rabbi Chia being, kind of excommunicated and then brought back, and the magical healing powers of Rabbi Chia and his life lived in in the world of Torah to the degree that he does. So yeah, very interesting. These stories, the Bavli stories tend to be better developed. There are certain pieces here I still haven't quite figured out. On one hand, he says, I would never do it. My ancestors did with Hillel, but he's willing to do it with Rav Huna. So that seems like maybe, okay. Maybe on second thought, he would. Let's take a look at Moed Katan, right? This, we'll start this. I want to get through this.
Nechama,
Yeah,
sorry. I just felt that maybe Rabbi Chia was being modest in his way, didn't want to look at the naked bodies of other people around him.
yeah,
So he
absolutely.
closed
Absolutely.
his eyes or he did some sort of meditation.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's true. I think there's something, yes, absolutely. He's trying to not be distracted from the like the bathhouse was a place where there was a lot of physical, it was supposed to be a very physically pleasurable experience. Which by the way, anytime I get into the jacuzzi, that moment is so pleasurable. Like you're like, oh, thank God, right? Like there is something about allowing your body to be cared for that is very, very wonderful. And the Rambam will say, definitely, right? We all know we need that. He goes to the bathhouse, but he also recognizes that it's possible to take that too far, right? We know the Romans do. Bathhouse becomes a place of very, very kind of some promiscuity, but also just like a celebration of the flesh. So I think it's not so much that he's not willing to enjoy his body being cared for. He doesn't want to be caught into the bathhouse culture, so to speak. And other rabbis obviously are not as concerned, right? Everyone has their the things they're concerned about. So this last source we're going to get to today, Moed Katan, and then we'll pick up with it next week. And then we haven't yet gotten to the birth of his son. I mean, we've met his sons, but there's a whole story around their birth. And there's a story with Rebbe and the sons, and then there's a story with what happens after he dies. So we're not going to get up to that today. Once again, on another occasion, Rebbe decreed that students not be taught in the marketplace, only in the Beit Midrash. What verse did he expound? Your rounded thighs are like jewels, right? It's from Shir HaShirim. Just as a thigh is ordinarily hidden, and that is the jewel-like aspect of the thigh, that it's hidden and not revealed, so too the words of Torah, which are the works of the rest of the pasuk is the works of the hands of an artist. So the Torah is the works of a hand of an artist, God, and those words have to be protected, have to be hidden in the appropriate, right? You can reveal the thigh in an appropriate setting. You can reveal the words of Torah in an appropriate setting, which is the Beit Midrash. Rabbi Chia went out and taught his 2 nephews, Rav and Rabba bar Chana, in the marketplace. He deliberately goes and teaches them. They could be learning in the academy. He doesn't go and grab 2 market vendors. He teaches them in the marketplace. Rebbe heard what was done and became angry. When Rabbi Chia came to visit, Rebbe mocks him and calls his Iya, sounds like a donkey. Who is calling you outside? Chia understood that Rebbe was upset with him, was insulted. And again, here too, this is the Bavli's version. He excommunicates himself. He goes out for 30 days. That's what happens. So this story where Rebbe then insults him, yeah. In the article I read about the derogatory attitude of Eretz Yisrael sages to Babylonian sages who come to Eretz Yisrael, this is an example used that there's tension here, that Rabbi Chia is bringing maybe a culture or whatever he's brought from Bavel into Eretz Yisrael, and Rebbe doesn't like it, and so he insults him. On the 30th day, Rebbe sends a message saying, come. He later reversed his opinion, saying, don't come. At the outset, the Gemara says, what did he hold, and ultimately, why did he change his mind? Initially, Rebbe held that the part of the day is like the entire day. It's the 30th day. So, miktzat yomo kakulo, the part of the day is like the whole day. It's a principle. Ultimately, he said, no, with regard to excommunication or cherem, we don't say it. So he changed it. That's how the Gemara tries to apologize or explain this reversal. Like it seems a little, although we do know, you can imagine somebody, yeah, please come. And then be like, no, absolutely not. Don't come, right? When we're insulted, we think we're over it. And then it's like, no, I'm not yet over it. In the end, Chia came. He says, why did you come? Chia says, well, you sent me a message that I should come. He says, but I sent you a second message, you should not come. He said, well, the first messenger I saw, and the second message I did not see. Like, what do you want from me? And Rebbe then says, and it's beautiful, that when a man's ways please Hashem, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And he says, basically, that was from Hashem. That was divine assistance, which takes us back to where we started, the idea that we see things as coming from Hashem. So that's what he says. He realizes he wanted maybe one more day to prepare for that meeting. However, like the Gemara tells us, it's because of a halachic consideration. If I would take that paragraph out, because that was like an add-on, then I would have a person who needs one more day to face the person who he was angry at or insulted by. That to me is very real. Oh yeah, totally. I'm sorry. These stories are, yeah. They are because I think human relationship.
Great, and yet on the other hand, they're very petty.
So I had a conversation with someone. I'm reading a book, and we're going to stop here with the text because I'm going to end with some. Hadassah Ben Ari, who is she was married to Hanan Ben Ari. I'm just reminded, it was a wonderful singer. And they recently divorced, and that's not the important part of the story. I'm just telling you who she is if you've heard of her. She came out, she's a writer, she's a wonderful writer. And she just came out with a book in Hebrew called Ma'ata Yodea al Ga'agua, What Do You Know About Yearning? And it's a series of 18 chapters of interviews with war widows. And from start 1973 until today. And I think 3 or 4 agreed to have their names be used, including Hadar Golden's fiance. She's the last chapter, and the rest are anonymous. And one of the things she says came out, and what she was looking for is we often romanticize, right? When people look at, oh, that must perfect, everything was perfect, and then you had this loss. And the stories are very, very real. They tell moments of real conflict and tension. A fight even on the day the person goes off to fight, like that the marriages were real, that many of them were wonderful and many of them were just real. When we think people are great, we think that means that in every aspect of their life, they overcome the pettiness that plagues all of us. And I think the beauty of which is very sad. I've only if you're ready to read it. It's my husband's like, you're reading in Hebrew. I'm like, I can't put it down. It's so well done. But the stories, I think the brilliance of the stories, and I've said this for years, and I've had this not complaint, but this like observation, is that the Bavli could have redacted and edited out all these harsh moments, and they don't, because people are complicated. And the fact that we can overcome that, there are reconciliations, but they have a complicated relationship. That Rabbi Chia really, as a scholar, is probably a match for Rebbe. And yet, right, Rebbe's at the head of the academy. And how do you do? And here you have poor Rabbi Yishmael saying, wait, do you love him more than me? Is he greater than my father? Those are real. People have to really work to not let that be what affects every single relationship, right? The work. And so what I take from these stories, and we're going to get to his wife, and we're going to get, the 3 of the sages have terrible marriage, right? Very unhappy marriages with women who are not kind to them, right? That's real. right? And if we're not, if we're not prepared to allow our leaders who are great also have frailty and flaw, then there's no hope for us in being able to really learn from them. There are people who really are very pious in everything they do. When you read, I just heard an interview with Rav Mordechai Eliyahu's son, Rav Shmuel Eliyahu, a podcast he did with his daughter. I'm just going to say again, the world has turned on its axis. It was a podcast where he talks about sexual misconduct, severe sexual misconduct in the religious community. And he is so open about it. And I'm like,
Wow.
whoa, right? And his daughter is saying, it's so hard for me. I'm getting all, I think she must be a social worker. She's getting all these complaints and these women who have been really taken advantage of in the most terrible way. And I'm like, first of all, I cannot believe we're talking about this. I can't believe we're talking about this. And in such an open way, you cannot mistake what they're talking about. There is not the lashon nikia of like, wait, are they talking about that? Am I getting it? No, like everything is very clear. Not too graphic, but clear. And he talks about his father in a very reverent way. But I really do think all I've read about Rav Mordechai Eliyahu is he really was like had this tzidkut in a lot of the ways he dealt with everyone around him and his family. And so I think there are people like that. I really do. And I think there are a lot of people like the sages we meet who are great in certain areas of their life and have work to do in the other. We are grateful that there are Rav Mordechai Eliyahu's, right? We really are. We want to know there are people who are that good and that consistent and that righteous. And it's somewhat reassuring that someone like Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, who we haven't gone to, get into a terrible situation that they can't really recover from. Because we're not grateful that they don't recover from it, but we're grateful that like, oh, people who have this wonderful relationship with God and Torah and learning also are human beings who struggle with the real what's the opposite of virtues? The vices, right? The 12 deadly, right? The mortal sins and they also have to struggle to overcome. And that gives us strength that we can struggle also, that our struggle is permitted. So that's why I think the stories are fascinating. That when there's hierarchy of who is greater, you're going to have people who feel bad, right? Even if they don't want to, they feel bad. And how do you handle those? How do you handle that sense of emotion? And today, of course, we'd say, go talk to someone, right? Don't keep it inside. They do talk. They talk to Eliyahu and Navi, who also gets excommunicated, gets in trouble, right? Like there's something, the stories are funny and the stories are a little bit irreverent and the stories are very relatable, even if they also challenge us. I'm sorry, I've gone over time. I apologize, 5 minutes, but we started like 4 minutes late. So I'm going to give us that. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please join us next week. We're going to
Thank you.
I'm leaving these. If you
excellent.
do come in and want a hard copy of what I started with, feel free to come in. I'm going to leave them in the office.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
No, yeah, but the fact.
And Rabbi Kudler was really.
Yes.
There would have been David Avella. Honestly,
Yes, and that's the thing.
Yeah, but he is really.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
So this.
Yes, and that's interesting. And so we all have the